When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Bruiser. User, DRM4N. Posted, November 22nd, 1997.
Billy Dixon woke up to rumbling, followed by chiming bells, and thought he was in heaven. Considering the life he'd led up to that point, it wasn't the first place he would have expected to find himself, so it came as a surprise. An even bigger surprise was opening his eyes and, instead of seeing harps and angels, finding himself next to one of Able, Indiana's many railroad crossings. Those bells hadn't been angelic. They'd been signaling the passing of a freight train, its caboose still visibly retreating in the distance. How had he got here again? Had he been on a bender? His head ached as if he'd spent a night huddled around a bonfire, drinking Thunderbird and huffing glue, except he'd sworn off glue a few months back. He'd wanted to have a clear head when telling Randy he needed to step back from the business. Randy, that was it. He'd gone to Randy's house to tell him it was time to find another Bruiser, since Billy was gonna move to Indianapolis to be with Monica full-time. Then, what? His memory was still spotty, the throbbing in his head taking up too much space for anything else to get traction. Billy reached his hand up to rub his head, but for some reason, the left wouldn't cooperate. Alrighty was game as usual, his knuckles thick and hairy from a lifetime of cracking skulls for the highest bidder. The left, however, wouldn't even move an inch. Had it fallen asleep while he was out? Billy raised himself up off the ground to see that his left hand wasn't moving because the whole thing was gone. Not just the hand, the whole arm, right up to his armpit, where a tuft of hair and wet, splintered bone stuck out of a bloody, charred mass of flesh. Despite this, Billy found himself shockingly calm. Prodding gingerly at the exposed bone fragment produced a sharp jolt of pain, which had the secondary effect of fully bringing him back to consciousness. He sat up, his vision swimming briefly. A few feet away, laying in a sizable pool of blood between creosote-soaked railway ties, was his left arm. On its middle finger, his middle finger, Billy corrected himself, a ruby the size of marble set in a thick gold ring glinted in the morning light. The bicep was as bloody and blackened as the stump from which it had been separated. It looked as if the wound had somehow been crudely cauterized. What the fuck is going on? His voice was hoarse, his lungs aching, reinforcing the possibility he'd been huffing again. Something was tugging at the edges of Billy's memory, shifting in the gravel. He placed his right hand down to steady him, feeling a rough texture beneath his palm, a crumpled paper bag. Its exterior dusted with silver spray paint. Even at the height of his love affair with inhalants, Billy never huffed paint. Collecting debts required your marks to be intimidated by you, and it was hard to be afraid of anyone if the lower half of their face was spackled with Krylon. The spattered flecks triggered something in his mind, and memories flooded back. He had gone to Randy's to let him know he was moving on. When he got there, Billy found him at his kitchen table, getting drunk and high with Trevor and Mark. Randy's kitchen was the kind of place where people knew they could always count on finding a party when they passed through town. Walls which were once white had long been yellowed by smoke from 1,000 cigarettes, doobies, and crack pipes, the paint peeling off in thin strips. Overflowing ashtrays and half-full cans of Bud littered the table alongside someone's loaded .45. Randy had listened, nodding along a little too quickly as Billy explained that he'd gotten himself clean and wanted out of the life. He wasn't sure what kind of career options he had waiting for him in Indianapolis. He just knew that breaking arms over meth debts wasn't compatible with the future he saw for himself and Monica. Meeting her had been a minor miracle, and he wanted with all his heart to insulate her from the world he'd grown up in. Billy thanked Randy for everything over the years and promised he could be counted on to memory hole everything business-related, so Randy didn't have to worry. Hearing the story after the fact, it was hard to know for sure whether Billy was overly confident or exceptionally naive in his expectations. Either way, the blow which rained down on his head from behind caught him completely off guard. Now, knowing the broad strokes as to how he'd gotten to the train tracks, Billy understood things. 1, a man couldn't live long with the injuries he'd sustained. 2, before he died, he fully intended to kill Trevor, Mark, and Randy. Wobbling with effort, he rose to his feet and tottered over to his amputated arm. Tucked away behind one of the rails near his limb were the freshly burnt remains of what looked like homemade cherry bombs. Back before he and Randy had gotten kicked out of school, they used to drop the then still legal fireworks into toilets in the girls' bathroom. They were powerful little things, never failing to nuke the toilet itself and blast porcelain shards across the room. Looking from his ruined shoulder to the scorch marks on the rail, Billy figured his still being alive was a freak accident. The train had taken off his arm at exactly the same place some little bastards had dropped a couple of firecrackers, which had been set off by sparks from the wheel. The resulting blast had seared his joint enough to mostly stop the bleeding. Mostly. Shock was the thing he had to worry about now, Billy thought. There wasn't much time, so he picked up his dead arm by its sizable bicep and began to walk. The crossing he'd been left at was on Pecolia, less than a mile from Randy's house. If anyone saw him making that return trip, they must have thought he was a nightmare made flesh, a monster of a man in tattered blue jeans and the remains of a blue flannel shirt, both covered liberally in blood. More dripped out of his hairline, rivulets streaking across a face puffy with bruises and contusions. Worst of all would have been the leaking stump where his arm had been, the one that now swung heavily from his right hand. The world was going white at the edges, but Billy refused to let it slip from him completely. He bore down, tightening his grip and clenching every muscle he could. He knew he'd never see Monica again, but he could at least do this. I wonder if it ever occurred to him what he would do if he got to Randy's and the guys weren't there, or they were there and had backup. Whatever the case, worrying about it would have been wasted effort because he heard their 3 voices through the flimsy front door. They were in the same place they'd been when Billy first came asking for Randy's blessing, a cigar-sized joint burning in Trevor's hand. Mark, whose back was to the door, was the last to clock the new arrival, his surprise allowing enough time for Billy to swing the mutilated arm down hard on Mark's head. The first strike split the hefty man's scalp. The second caved in the back of his head like it was a ripe melon. Randy was next to break his paralysis. Reaching for the .45 on the table, he raised it up as Billy was wresting his ring from Mark's pulp skull. Its report was deafening in the small kitchen, the bullet punching into Billy's already savaged left side. With a wild cry, the larger man again swung his arm, this time crosswise, the bloody ruby clicking loudly as it knocked the pistol from Randy's hand. One final shot echoed out, this second bullet burying itself in one of the peeling walls. Trevor, who'd been watching the scene unfold, was jolted out of his weed-induced stupor by the gunshots. "Hey, man, we left you on the train tracks. Are you, dead?" In response, Billy ripped the doobie away from him and jammed the lit end in the stoned man's eye. It melted into his ocular jelly with a hiss, and Trevor screamed. The brief diversion gave Randy time to recover the gun, and it barked twice more. One round winging Billy's good arm, the second burrowing into his belly, lodging up against his spine. A third trigger pull landed on an empty chamber. Randy blanched. What hit him next was Billy's good fist, a relentless hammering that flattened his nose and fractured his orbital socket beyond repair. Not that Randy would ever need it again. The last he would see on this earth was Billy raising that dead arm one last time before cramming it into his former friend's open mouth, burnt end first. When he was done, a hairy hand reached out of a split esophagus, the dying man's lungs aspirating blood until they collapsed under the weight. A stinging in his back caused Billy to turn around and in time to see Trevor's hand gripped around a Bowie knife. When the bigger man failed to react, Trevor ran for his life, the joint still cooked into one blind eye. He'd come to me later to help him remove it, and I'd have to send him to a hospital. My area of expertise mostly covers removing bullets, stitching stab wounds, and setting broken bones. I'm a doctor, if you hadn't clocked that already. Once upon a time, was a practicing physician respected by his community. Nowadays, I live here in Abel, patching up people like Trevor. My house is essentially Switzerland for the town's various criminal factions, or it would be if they could find it on a map. What they know is that everyone who comes through my door is treated equally, so long as they pay. I'd worked on Billy many times before, but when he collapsed in my living room after the rampage at Randy's, there wasn't anything I could do for him except listen to his story and shoot him up with enough morphine so he wouldn't suffer on his way out. Oh, and call Monica. He was too far gone to dial, so I did it for him, propping the receiver up against his ear. When he'd said as much as he could, Billy went silent, save for his labored breathing. Monica continued crying long after it stopped.
Subject, what you wanted. User, LaMama06. Posted, January 12, 1999.
The first time I said it, I didn't mean it. I hope he just doesn't come home tonight. I said it through gritted teeth, phone pressed to my cheek while I scraped dried mac and cheese off a chipped plate. The twins were screaming about the TV, the baby was crying in her high chair, and I was still wearing the same milk-stained sweatshirt I'd had on since Monday. My friend Sherry just laughed. "Girl, I don't blame you. You deserve a break." Look, it was supposed to be me just venting, because, you see, Roy had been out since noon running errands, which actually meant drinking at Frank's or sitting in some other asshole's garage with a cooler of cheap beer. But then 10 rolled around and he wasn't home. Kids were asleep and everything. I was pretty pissed at first, to be honest, but by midnight, I was pacing. Then, 2 a.m., I was standing on the porch staring at the empty driveway. Well, he didn't come home. Next morning, I told Sherry. "Well," she said, real calm, "you did say you didn't want him to." I laughed, but it felt wrong, like she knew something I didn't. I know, but I didn't mean it." "Yeah," she said, "but sometimes pissed is the truth in disguise." Roy called later, admitted he had passed out in his cousin's garage, swore he tried to come home, and I was upset, but I didn't argue. There was no point, just said the kids missed him. But then, a few days later, something similar happened again. "He's such a damn child," I bitched to Sherry. "I wish his damn truck would just disappear so he'd be stuck here to give me some help with his house and these ungrateful little shits." Next morning, he called from a gas station. "Truck got towed," he said, and I got no idea why. Then, another time, I grumbled, "If he don't stop drinking, he's gonna end up dead." Well, that night, he passed out cold on the lawn. I Had to drag him inside like dead weight, and it looked like he had a little bit of vomit dripping from his chin. Oh, I thought, this man is such a pain, but in retrospect, I should have noticed a little more what was going on. One night, stirring spaghetti while being assaulted by the scent of a dirty diaper, I muttered and complained to Sherry, God, I really just wish he'd be gone for a while so I could breathe. Sure enough, that night, he collapsed in the bathroom. A seizure, withdrawal, they said. The ambulance took him to county, and I sat in the hospital lobby, cold coffee in my hand. He's in the hospital, I cried, tears dripping down my face as I talked to Sherry on the payphone in the hall. They don't know if he's going to come out of this okay. I don't know if I can do this without him, if I can deal with life. I mean, I know I said I want him gone, but this, it can't be real. No, it can't. Silence. Then Sherry responded, sounding a bit confused and a little annoyed. But I thought this is what you wanted. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I thought I was helping, she said. You sounded so done. Every time you said something, I just made it happen. You made it happen? That's what friends do, she said. You needed help. I gave it to you. I didn't actually mean any of it, I yelled, my voice echoing through the hospital hallway. You meant enough. I just listened, she insisted. I hung up the payphone and drove home like a ghost. That night, I laid awake, staring at the ceiling while the baby breathed beside me. What have I done? I thought, and how the hell did Sherry make it happen? I guess tomorrow I need to call her back and maybe plead with her to fix this, but maybe I'll wait another day because it is kind of nice not having to deal with that drunk prick here.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.